Welcome to our penultimate slash ultimate series on probability. This will be the last set of material that you have to do for the test for this course, unless, of course, you're watching sometime other than spring 2020. But for those of you who aren't aware, this is in the height of the COVID outbreak and quarantine, and so we have had to make a few adjustments for the course. We're stopping a little early in the content, but we are still going to finish strong. The main set of ideas left for us to cover deals with probability. We're going to look first at simple probability, then we'll move into expectation, and then finally just some miscellaneous topics to round out the unit. And without further ado, let's get to it. Simple probability. And just because something is simple doesn't mean it's easy. That's something we'll see here going forward. There's a lot of basic concepts that are simple to understand on a simple level. Well, that sounds awful, but simple to understand on a basic level. But to truly master it does take a bit of time and effort. And we'll get through that here together. So when we are talking probability, there are two things we talk about specifically. We talk about an experiment, and we talk about the outcome of that experiment. Experiments and outcomes. Sometimes I will refer to events when I mean experiments, but I try very hard not to use the word events because in some textbooks, event is experiment, and in other textbooks, event is outcome. So I try not to use the word at all to avoid confusion. But anyway, an experiment is something you do, and it has some results. For instance, you flip a coin. The act of you flipping the coin is the experiment. The act of you rolling a die is an experiment. The result you get is the outcome. But just the action of doing something, that has the experiment. The results are the outcomes. Investing in real estate, that's something you can do. And what happens after that is maybe good, maybe bad, right? We don't know what to say on a test, so we just pick a random choice. Maybe we get it right, maybe we get it wrong. The experiment is just the action we take. The result, and for us in this course, it's going to be out of our hands. It's usually going to be random chance after we do our thing. The result is the outcome. So our outcome here might be the coin comes up heads, or the dice comes up one, or the real estate doesn't do so well, or maybe it does, or the answer we picked was right, or maybe it's wrong. Those are our outcomes. So for every experiment, there are outcomes. And if we list out every possible outcome for an experiment, we have what is called the sample space. And that might be the new piece of vocabulary for a lot of you. Many of you know what I mean when I say experiment and outcome. You might have called it event, results, that sort of thing, but you know what I've been talking about so far. Now might be a little bit unfamiliar to you. We start talking about sample spaces, that should bring to mind the list of all the possible results. So for example, let's make a sample space where we're going to flip a coin, and of course, flip a coin once, you either have a heads come back or a tails come back. That's it. And also they're equally likely, so that's nice for us for calculation purposes. But those are all the results when you flip a coin. Don't give me that it lands on its sides nonsense. No, it doesn't. It's either heads or it's tails. All right, well, what if we flip it twice? What if we flip it 3 times? Well, if we flip it twice, it can come up heads or tails on the first flip and heads or tails on the second flip. So if I want to list out all the results in just a list, I would make a chart, or I would just make a list being very careful, and I would have heads heads, heads tails, tails heads, and tails tails. And some of you might be screaming at your screen saying, well, heads tails is the same as tails heads, right? Well, from the perspective of it being one heads and one's tails, you're right, but from a probability perspective, it's different. And we'll see that in the next video. And then finally, just to list this out for you, and again, it's going to get pretty tough if you do this for more and more flips. You'd see we have 8 results.